So we are finishing it tonight. So we're in Revelation part 27 now. So, but we're making good progress. We've gotten through practically the whole book. And then when we get to chapter 20, it's going to start to pivot. I'm going to get to the final judgment of all the world and all the wickedness of the world. And God's going to complete that. And then he's going to build an amazing world, and we're going to be with him. And that's the joy that we have in Christ. So we'll go over that. It may take quite a few lessons. I don't know. We'll see how it goes when we talk about chapters 21 and 22. So we are in chapter 18. So we'll start with our introduction. I'll just hang the, okay. You just come and get the clicker. Hey, thank you. Make sure it's on. 11 to 24. 11 to 24. Yeah, chapter 18, 11 to 24. Okay, so that went really fast. Okay, so the question really is, why would anyone mourn over evil? Why? Those people will only mourn if they have an invested interest in evil. So somebody's really investing in evil and, greed or whatever it is, then if it goes away, then there's a mourning, isn't there? There's a sadness. And this is what we see in our text. This metaphor for the world system of the future is known as Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Of course, that's what God calls it. And even I would think even the system now that it will develop into this final system. And yeah. And these people want to mourn their her eternal demise, so that they want to mourn it. They want to mourn that the harlot is finished and they're destitute. So it truly tells us how out of touch this world is to the Lord. Certainly, Babylon is nothing to mourn over, but rather we should rejoice, shouldn't we? Because of all the trouble that Babylon has caused the world, even now. So once again, Babylon has become a metaphor. Now, whether or not the Antichrist calls the capital city Babylon, it might happen that way. We don't know, but we do know that this is really a system that God is naming, and then we'll go into the Old Testament and talk about that from ancient Babylon, that perspective. Okay, so we're going to start with verses 11 through 13. And the merchants of the earth, okay, let me give you the title. The merchants or business owners are mourning over the death of the harlot. They're mourning. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her. For no man buyeth their merchandise any more. The merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and thyine wood and all manner vessels of ivory. By the way, do you go down and shop for these things? When you go shopping during the week, do you ever shop for some gold or silver, precious stones or pearls or fine linen? Do you go shopping for that? Go over to B&M and Bargains. They just gonna sell us some thyine. Are they gonna sell us some fine linen and purple and scarlet and silk and scarlet and thyine wood and all manners of ivory and all manner vessels of most precious wood and of brass and iron and marble and cinnamon, I can't never say that word, and odors, and ointments and frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour and wheat and beasts and sheep and horses and chariots and slaves and the souls of men. They're mourning over that they can't buy those items. Isn't that interesting? So the next group to join this funeral dirge are the money-making merchants. Now they weep, they cry out, they mourn because there is no one left to buy or trade their goods. It's over. They know it. This collapse of their economy will mean the end of their trade and income forever. Okay? This list of various merchandise illustrates the extreme compromise and materialism of this crushed society. I'm talking about when it gets crushed. Okay, very few of these goods are necessities. Would you agree? I mean, like I said, you go down to B&M, you go to Morrison's and buy some gold or silver or thine wood. You're going to buy some furniture of thine wood? I don't think so. We don't even know what it is. Okay, but there are people that do. So we find that most of the things that we're talking about here are luxuries, aren't they? Including precious metals, jewels, and cloth, and aromatic perfumes and exotic foods. Even people themselves have become no more than commodities. We call it human trafficking, don't we? Human lives have become slaves who have and will be sold in Babylon. Rome historically was known as a city of great luxury and extravagance. The Roman emperors and elites were known for their extravagant lifestyles, gaudy clothing, and excessive banquets. This list of exotic goods gives description to the breadth of the trade that would mainly go to a Roman port. Much of the list is identical to the list of trade mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 27, verse 12 through 22. Does anybody know what that's covering? Ezekiel in chapter 26 through 28? Okay, it's the fall of Phoenicia, and especially it's actually focused on the city of Tyre. It was an extravagant city, amazing. I mean, in worldly proportions, I mean, it was one of the most amazing cities, port cities that was ever built. And likewise, Rome's luxury and extravagance led to its decadence, and it eventually destroyed her. In the end, Tyre of Phoenicia was also destroyed. Alexander the Great was the one that finished him off. Ezekiel chapter 27, verse 36 says, the merchants among the people shall hiss at thee. Thou shalt be a terror, and never shalt thou be anymore. And it's true. Today, if you went and visited Tyre, all you'd find is the ruins of that ancient city, but it's gone. All that's left in its place is just a city, like any Western city in the world. It's in Lebanon, and so that city of Tyre, that great port city, it was like a New York in its day. It really was. Imagine just New York just being a little hovel of a town as such, when it was a great city, a great port city at one time. All right. What does it teach us? What are these lessons teaching us? It's teaching us that we should not live for money. Why? Why should we not live for money? Because money is worthless in eternity. You're not going to take it with you. And we should keep our guard constantly against greed, which is a sin that is always ready to take over our lives. God wants us to work and provide for our families, and he gives us commands for the proper use of money. But when the desire for money fills our lives, money turns into a false god. We need to be careful not to be enslaved by our desire for wealth. This is what we see here. So it's a warning, even to us in our day. Not only just a prophecy, the future. In verse 14, the luxury of Babylon will come to an end. I put Babylon in quotes because, once again, it's a system. Perhaps it will have the name of that, but it doesn't have to. In verse 14, it says, and the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee, and all things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. Sounds like what I just read to you out of Ezekiel 27, verse 36. Let me read it again. It says, the merchants among the people shall hiss at thee, thou shalt be a terror, and never shalt thou be anymore. So it's the same idea, isn't it? Same idea. It's interesting how the book of Revelation can correlate with the book of Ezekiel. We're going to talk about that tonight. Now, the fancy things refer to all the exotic imports that would come into the cities like Tyre and Rome. There are people who love these things, but when Babylon the Great is destroyed, it will be gone forever. Forever. All the luxury and splendor that is found in this world will not last. So the voice from heaven, remember that was the beginning when we were in Revelation 18, verse 4, talked about the angel, and then you have the voice from heaven. It continues to speak against these greedy merchants. All the fancy things they loved, all their luxuries and splendor, they're gone forever. This list of goods illustrates the extreme materialism of their society. Few of these goods were necessities, most were luxuries. Even the slave trafficking of the people were commodities, and they were sold as slaves to Babylon. Their love for non-essential luxuries had madly driven these merchants. We need to be careful of being attached to luxury. We could be in danger of being absorbed in possessions and pleasure. Let us ensure that our desires lead us in the right direction. We are in this world, but not of this world. We should have boundaries and not go after everything we see. Let us keep our desires on serving God and building his kingdom by winning others to Christ. And we really focus on that. I think that's a lesson here. So not only is it talking about the future, talking about the demise of Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots, but it's also something that we can learn in our day. And I think we're getting closer to it, and I think we can see the closer to the end, you can see how terrible this monster really is. In verse 15 through 17a, that means the beginning of verse 17. I'll read that to you. These merchants are filled with terror. So not only the merchants are they weeping, but they're afraid because they've seen the destruction just happen like that. And that's terrorizing, isn't it? It's awful. You see something just is destroyed in a moment. So they're filled with terror. So this is the verses. It says, the merchants of these things which were made rich by her shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing and saying, alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, for in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught. Do you notice that? Do you notice that this is given the identification out when we looked at Revelation 17, verse 4. Do you remember that? Because the harlot is dressed just like that, in purple and scarlet, decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. There's the verses. Sorry, I should have put that up for you. You can look at it. So it just means very quickly. 1 hour is just like the hour came and boom, everything was destroyed. You know, they don't have a, yeah, just the situation happened in Libya, which we need to pray for. But many people were killed, and and the destruction came without warning, really. Just 1 hour, just like that. That's what it means. In 1 hour, it's like saying immediately, it just happened so quickly.
So it's not going to a specific timeline.
No, I don't believe so. I believe what it's doing is talking about the veracity, talking about how fast and clicking suddenly it is destroyed. Yeah, that's a good word for it. All right. So we find that just like the kings of the world, these merchants, and this is in verses 9 through 10, because we covered that last week. We talked about the rulers first, and then we went into the merchants. So that's what we're talking about right now. We're talking about the merchants. Then we're going to go into the shipbuilders, okay, and the transport people. Okay, so we find that just like the kings of the world, these merchants are also terrified at the awesome torment of this great city. Like the world's leaders, they wept, they cried. Notice that this description of the beautiful city is the same description, remember I just mentioned this, of the great whore found in Revelation 17, verse 4, because that's who it is. These merchants are terrified of the suddenness and totality of this great city's destruction. With a society's collapse or a destroyed economy, there is no longer a market for exotic and pricey goods that these merchants traded with and from which they had grown very wealthy. And there are people which most of us are not in the market for these wealthy items, but there are people in the world today that are definitely in the market for them. Okay, and they buy it all the time, and it's over now. The controllers of different parts of this economic system will greatly mourn over its fall. Political leaders will mourn because they were overseers of the world system's wealth and were set in a position to greatly enrich themselves. These merchants will mourn because Babylon, their greatest customer, will be gone forever. The economy is gone. See, it's a concept, isn't it? I mean, when you really look at the economy, the world economy, what is that? It's like a big beast. Many people have to have a university degree to even begin to understand how it works, the inner workings of it. Most of us just live in it, and we just have to operate within the system. But it's a huge system, isn't it? Very controlling. Okay. It's going to be gone someday, forever. The ship captains will no longer have anywhere to bring their goods because the merchants will have nowhere to sell them. The fall of this evil world system will affect everyone who enjoyed and depended on it. No one will remain unaffected by its fall. No one. Verse 17b through 19. Those who transported the goods will also greatly mourn the death of the system, of course, and we just talked about that. So let's look at it. And every shipmaster and all the companies in ships and sailors and as many as trade by sea stood afar off and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what city is like unto this great city? And they cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, alas, alas, that great city wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness, for in 1 hour is she made desolate. Yeah, just in a moment, suddenly. So this third group to join this funeral dirge will be the ship owners and captains of the merchant ships and their crews, and all that earn their living from transport. Quite a business. A vast amount of trade was carried on by ships that arrived from far distant lands. As the merchants had become rich on the goods, those who ran and monitored the ships became rich delivering the goods. With the fall of the great city or world economy, their services will no longer be required. There is no one to buy, and there's nothing to trade. And as everything goes up in smoke, they throw dust on their heads, showing great sorrow and pain. By the way, that's a Jewish tradition to throw dust on the head. Job did that even before he wasn't. There was no Jews. Well, there was, but this is really early days. Job threw dust on his head, didn't he, when he was mourning? Yeah, it was ash, but it's dust. Okay, so Ezekiel had written on the port of Tyre. Remember we talked about Tyre, the destruction of that city. That's now it's just a ruin. It's gone, but it was a great port city, ancient port city. And this is what he said, Ezekiel. Hold on. Okay, let me just read it to you. I don't have it up here. Okay, let me just read it to you. This is Ezekiel chapter 27, verse 29 through 30. It says, all that handle the oar, the mariners, and all the pilots of the sea shall come down from their ships, and they shall stand upon the land, and they should cause their voice to be heard against thee, and shall cry bitterly, and shall cast up dust upon their heads, and shall wallow themselves in the ashes. So do you see how this relates? So really what you're seeing is the fall of Babylon is likened to the fall of Tyre. The fall of Babylon is likened to the fall of ancient Babylon. These great empires that once were, and I mean, people in those days never thought they would ever fall, but they did. They're finished. And so will this one. That's why the prophecy is given in this light. You follow? So is John quoting Ezekiel? I dare say. So in verse 20, yet here the contrast that heaven is rejoicing over the annihilation of Babylon. So though everyone on earth that loved this mother of harlots and abominations of the earth, everyone who loved her and lived for her and lived for the greed and lived for the opium wealth and on all the luxuries and everything, they're mourning, right? They're in mourning, but heaven is rejoicing. Look at here. There's verse 20. Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. So you see the contrast? The earth is mourning, but what's heaven doing? Yeah, because God can see the truth. God can see what this beast really is, how terrible and how wicked it is, and how much destruction it has caused, how much war it's caused. Yeah, yeah. Christians have died. A lot of people have died because of human greed and creating a system, a godless system. Okay, so this is what we have. In contrast to the weeping and mourning of the people at the fall of Babylon, the heavens are rejoicing. A call to rejoice is extended to the godly and holy people of God and to the apostles and to the prophets and to the believers who have been persecuted and killed because they refused to join Babylon's system and worship of the beast. So that's the future, of course, Revelation 17, verse 6. This fall will be God's judgment on behalf of his people. So God's going to cause the whole system to be crushed in one day, and there's no way they can rebuild it. It's gone, finished. It's God's judgment. A mighty angel casting a millstone into the sea brings a metaphor to the destruction of the destruction of Babylon, the harlot. And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, thus with violence shall this great city Babylon be thrown down and shall be found no more at all. Wow. So this is likened to something. You'll see it. I'll show it to you. Okay, and there we go. Okay. So this great millstone would be a stone of about 15 to 20 feet wide, a foot thick, and it would weigh thousands of pounds, which is heavier than any human can move. So a millstone, there's no way you can, none of us could pick up a millstone and throw it. You'd have to be a pretty strong man to do that, okay? But this angel did. So this a mighty angel, it says, picks up the millstone and throws it into the ocean. Now, as a huge boulder, you can imagine, you just kind of picture it, it hurtles through the air, it falls into the ocean, it sinks to the bottom, and so likewise, Babylon will disappear forever. That's the picture. Throwing the millstone into the sea. Now it's gone. It's disappeared forever. Interesting, because remember we talked about Ezekiel, this likening to Ezekiel's prophecy. Now we can notice that this is likening to Jeremiah's prophecy. You see, Jeremiah had given a similar prophecy to the ancient city of Babylon in Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 58 through 64. Excuse me. Babylon, Rome, and the future world economy of the Antichrist will have great glory and power, but then will disappear like a rock between the ocean waves. Metaphorically, everyone who lived for these great luxuries and power will have this millstone around their necks, and they will be dragged to the bottom of the sea and forever forgotten. So people who live for this system, that's all their life is wrapped around. Someday they're going to be forgotten forever. They thought that they would endure forever. They're going to find out that they were not. Okay. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it's a stone that flies through the air. You're talking about Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Never thought of that, but yeah, you can see how that likens to the stone. Of course, the stone is Christ. But in this metaphor, the actual stone is Babylon, being thrown into the sea. Okay, and it's a millstone. And it takes a very powerful angel to throw it into the sea. Right, right. Yeah. So could this be likened to what Jeremiah is talking about? So that here, remember, I talked about the prophecy of Jeremiah. We're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. But this is Jeremiah 51, verse 58 through 64. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the broad walls of Babylon shall be utterly broken, and her high gates shall be burned with fire. And the people shall labor in vain, and the folk in the fire, and they shall be weary. The word which Jeremiah the prophet commanded Seraiah, the son of Neriah, the son of Maaseiah, and when he went with Zedekiah the king into Babylon in the 4th year of his reign. Okay, let's see if I can go on the next one. And this Seraiah was a quiet prince. So Jeremiah, that's okay, wrote in a book all the evil that had come upon Babylon, even all these words that are written against Babylon. And Jeremiah said to Seraiah, when thou comest to Babylon and shalt see and shall read all these things, all these words. Okay, let me see where I'm going to cut off here. Okay, yeah, okay, desolate forever, okay. Then shalt thou say, O Lord, thou hast spoken against this place to cut it off, that none shall remain in it, neither man nor beast, but that it shall be desolate forever. Okay, and then go to the next one. And it shall be when thou hast made an end of reading this book, that thou shalt bind a stone to it and cast it into the midst of Euphrates. And thou shalt say, thus shall Babylon sink and shall not rise from the evil which I bring upon her, and they shall be weary. Thus far are the words of Jeremiah. Now, let me ask you a question. Is there a Babylonian kingdom today? Does the Babylonian kingdom of ancient Babylon in Jeremiah's day, does it continue on to our day? It's gone. It's gone. It's been gone for a long time, and it will never rise again. So God gave the prophecy, and I'm just going to go into Jeremiah. I'll explain it to you in just a moment. So but I want to talk about Ezekiel first. When understanding this Babylon, okay, that we're looking at tonight in chapter 18, we must discuss 2 Old Testament prophets, okay? Because we can see in chapter 18 their prophecies. So it's like John is actually referring to these prophecies in the Old Testament, which I find fascinating. Okay, so Ezekiel is the first one. Now, Ezekiel is a very interesting one because Ezekiel is probably the most misunderstood prophet in the Old Testament. His prophecies are very difficult to understand. Now, what happened was Ezekiel was sent to ancient Babylon in 597 BC. And this was with King Coniah. His name was Jehoiachin. He was the son of Jehoiakim, which was originally named Eliakim. Now, Ezekiel was ignored while he was in Babylon. He was ignored. He was discredited, and people charged him as crazy. Yet the temple was destroyed in 586 BC, just as he said. Okay, so people didn't really believe in this man Ezekiel, but his prophecy came to pass. He acted it out. He told them exactly how it would happen, everything. You need to study the book of Ezekiel. You'll see how he even acted out. Now, one of the reasons why he had to act things out a lot is because he couldn't really speak. He was mute. And the only time that he could speak is when he gave a prophecy. That's the way God made him. If you go to chapter 3, you'll see that God gave him a mandate. You're only going to speak when you speak my words. Okay? So it's really interesting. And so many times what he would do is he would act out his prophecies. And very, you'll see. You can just read it and you'll see the illustrations that he uses. So it's really interesting. He's very entertaining, I would say. Okay? And then in 586 BC, the temple was destroyed, and everything that was prophesied, that Ezekiel prophesied, took place. Okay? Everything. And his prophecies were twofold. The first part was the destruction of Solomon's temple and Israel's prosperity. This is chapters 1 through 32. And then the last part is the messages of hope and restoration of the nation Israel, chapter 33 through 48. And like I said, he acted it out. But after chapter 33, when he's given the second mandate, when after they destroyed the temple was destroyed, the people became very, very upset. They were depressed, basically. The whole nation was depressed because they thought we were finished. God has completely abandoned us. And Ezekiel said, oh, no, he hasn't. And he could speak now. So God gave him, you'll see it, God took away his muteness, and now he could speak openly to them. And his ministry now was one of comfort. And his great prophecy referred to the restoration of Israel. But at the same time, he talked about destruction of Edom. He talked about the destruction of Phoenicia. He went around the nations. It talked about the different nations that surrounded Israel at the time. And we did look at the one in Phoenicia, but he was in Babylon doing his prophecy. He was taken into captivity in 597. So that's Ezekiel. Okay. The second prophet is Jeremiah. Now, Jeremiah, once again, very misunderstood prophet, hard to understand. But Jeremiah had a different ministry. He stayed in Jerusalem. So during the time that Ezekiel was taken into Babylon, which is about 500 miles away from Israel, Jeremiah stayed. He stayed with the people in Jerusalem, and he prophesied of the fall of Judah. He talked about the destruction of the temple, which happened once again in 586 BC. Now, like Ezekiel, he was discredited, he was castigated, but unlike Ezekiel, he was arrested, he was imprisoned, and he was left for dead. They beat him. And then after they abandoned him, because his nation abandoned him, they left him in prison to starve to death, I guess. The Babylonians came and took him out of prison. And there was a general who offered Jeremiah prosperity. He said, if you meet me at the staging ground, I will make you a very wealthy man. I'll take you back to Babylon with me. You'll live in the best of all. You'll have everything you ever wanted. You will live in opulent wealth. You will be a multimillionaire, Jeremiah. If you come to my staging ground and meet me, I will take you to Babylon. But if Jeremiah would have done it, it would have discredited his whole ministry, because the people would have said, see, you were working with the Babylonians, because that's what they charged him for. They said, you're weakening our country. You're causing these Babylonians to come and attack us, and you're telling the people we're already destroyed. We might as well surrender. So you're taking the Babylonian side. But Jeremiah was not doing that. He was actually prophesying the word of God. All right. So when the temple fell, Jeremiah remained in the land. He remained in the land, and he had a man named Seraiah, and he gave him 2 chapters of his book, chapter 50 and chapter 51. And he says, I want you to go to Babylon with this scroll, okay? While Zedekiah is going back, this was the king who fell. He was made blind and his sons were slain, and you can go into history. But anyway, he went with him, it says, Seraiah came with him, and he stood there at the gate and went before the king, and he read the scroll, chapter 50 and chapter 51 of Jeremiah. And it is a curse against Babylon. And I guarantee you, when Seraiah was done with that, the Babylonians were seething. They were so angry. They probably wanted to kill him after he read that. Okay? But he was he was kind of a quiet man, unassuming man, I guess, is according to what we read. And he just read it. He took the scroll and he read the whole thing, all the curses of Babylon. You're going to fall. And then after he was finished, he took a large rock, and he wrapped the scroll in the rock, and he threw it in the middle of the Euphrates River and said, that's how you're going to end. Babylon, you're going to be finished just like that. Well, that's what you see in the book of Revelation. That's exactly what God's going to do with the system of this world. It gets more and more wicked all the time and gets more and more controlling all the time. He's going to destroy it. Just like that. In fact, in the book of Jeremiah, Seraiah throws it into a river, right? Into the Euphrates River. In the book of Revelation, the angel throws it in the middle of the sea. So that's a judgment for the whole world. You see that? So it's not just a judgment for one land, because the Euphrates was in Babylon. That was the destruction for them. But this is for the whole world. He throws it in the middle of the ocean, just lobs it out there in the middle of somewhere, where you're not going to find it. And that's the end. That is the end. And let me tell you, this ocean is huge. And the biggest of ships, when they're sunk, they're hard to find. So if somebody could take a millstone and literally go out in the middle of the sea and throw it in the sea, it's going to be hard to find that thing. And not even impossible. You might as well forget it. Yeah, it just won't be recovered. And so that's the thing. So that's the illustration. All right. So there's Jeremiah. We talked about him. So we're going to continue on now as we've gone into this. So the end. That's why we should not live and love this world. John said, love not the world, neither the things of the world. It's interesting that John, who wrote the Revelation, also told us not to love the world. Didn't he? Yeah. How interesting. So the end of Babylonian society will arrive. It will come. Okay? So here's the end. This is the lamentation. This is the lamentation. God's going to lament. It says, in the voice of harpers and musicians and of pipers and of trumpeters shall be heard no more at all in thee. And no craftsman of whatsoever craft he be, shall be found any more in thee. And the sound of a millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee. And the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee. And the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, and by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. Okay, so the mighty city thrown like a millstone into the sea will be destroyed forever. That's why we not live for something that's going to be destroyed forever. This city is filled with music and entertainment. It has a busy industry within its humming economy. The milling of the grain is provide plenty of food. People enjoy life, and there are wedding celebrations, but it collapses, and all that will be finished, and it will all be finished forever. It will be complete darkness, and not one single lamp. This is total and complete destruction without repair. That's what you're seeing there. But why? Because her merchants, who were the greatest in the world, have deceived the nations with her sorceries. Did you see that? The word sorceries probably refers to black magic. as it was certainly practiced in the Roman Empire and will certainly be part of any worship of Satan. And let me just say, there are people in the music industry, entertainment industry, who have literally, and I've heard their testimonies about the praying to the devil, giving their, if he would give them a power to entertain and make a lot of money. And it's a terrible thing to get involved in that kind of thing. And there are people that get involved in all kinds of things. And we really do have to realize that the kingdom of Antichrist will be a revival of the occult. And that's nothing new, that's old. The occult and witchcraft. But it can also picture the spell under which Rome, or a world order that has a flourishing economy, puts a spell on its people. They are so enamored by the greatness of their culture that they believe it will last forever. They willingly worship the beast and partake in what they perceive as the peace and joy that they thought that the beast had brought. And that's chapter 13, verse 14 through 17. They said, who can make war with him? They worshiped him. They worshiped the dragon who gave power unto the beast. That's why. That's why God hates it and will destroy it. In verse 24, the persecutor Babylon rightly deserves destruction. In Revelation 18, verse 24, it says, and in her was found the blood of the prophets and of saints and all that were slain upon the earth. So this system is a her. Okay. It's the great sin of Babylon, Rome, and Antichrist kingdom. They all shared. The Antichrist kingdom will share with these other former kingdoms like Rome and Babylon and others. These inhabitants enjoy the great prosperity that the beast's economy brings. However, in the streets of that great city, the blood of the prophets are spilled. Babylon is one who slaughtered God's people all over the world. Certainly, this was true of Rome, for being a Christian in the Roman Empire was tantamount to treason. The emperors considered themselves gods. They made temples, had them erected, excuse me, and of all their peoples. And it was the Christians who refused them. Persecution, excuse me, under the emperors Nero and Domitian reached heights of terror. I need some water. Yeah. Excuse me. Throat got really dry. That's everything. Excuse me. Good night. Yes. Okay, we turned off the recording. The coughing fit at the end. Thank you. Wash that down. Some lodged loose. Okay, so we're going to go into our trivia now.